Right, so thank you everyone for joining in for today's We Sri Lanka webinar. The title is titled "A Route to a Sustainable Future in Sri Lanka Through Renewable Energy," and it's done by Professor Ravi Silva. So Professor Ravi Silva, thanks for accepting our invitation, and I know you've taken some time to prepare the slides and for coming here today. So my name is Tushar Madhurasinghe. For those who weren't at the AGM, I was appointed president of APSL about 20 minutes ago. So which makes this, this is my first official event, right? So hope I do a good job in this. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of APSL. For those who are new, who just joined, I'm just going to speak about the local projects we do in the UK and move on to Sri Lanka. Maximum 5 minutes of your time. I don't want to drag this out too much. So we just had our 17th AGM. We're a UK registered charity, started in 2004. Got about 400 to 500 members now, and apart from the projects we do are focused on Sri Lanka and the UK as well as in Sri Lanka. So just to mention a few, in the UK we run various Ask the Expert series, Ask the Young Professionals series. This is about disseminating information, knowledge to our local Sri Lankans as well as non-Sri Lankans. These events are open to anyone basically. Then we've got the Living in the UK series, talks about Eastern or Western cultural values, something that I experience and which I want to make sure everyone does get exposed to. We've got a student mentoring scheme, which is open to students who want to get mentored by the network of professionals we have within our association. And we've also carried out research symposiums. We've got one scheduled for this October. Can I just remind everyone to put themselves on mute? I'll go through housekeeping later on, but if you just mute everyone now. Right, so this is the work in the UK. In Sri Lanka, we do several projects, and a few key projects are the scholarship scheme. We're sponsoring over 100 students, school children in Sri Lanka now, financially. And we're seeing that the changes we put into families in their lives. We've established solar villages in Sri Lanka. This is about sustainable development and creating and enhancing communities at large. It's not apart from providing the rations and meals to families in rural regions. We do long-term projects like this. We've established an emergency relief fund, which we reactivate as and when we need. And I'm just going to put out this personal request to anyone who would like to donate for COVID. We know the COVID situation, not only in the UK, but in Sri Lanka as well. Dire need of financial aid. So we've put two campaigns out on Facebook and on Virgin Money. So a quick appeal, if you can donate, just go to our website, you'll find the two links there. We've got a cancer relief fund which is up and running. We give financial assistance to cancer patients in Sri Lanka. This is about providing basic medical needs, transportation, and the needs are dire in Sri Lanka, and this is why we're doing this work. We funded PPE for hospitals in Sri Lanka. We've got a trust that we received a donation through late Mrs. Florence de Silva, which gives assistance to children in Sri Lanka for the education needs. We've so far funded around 20 projects, and that's been going for the last 2 years. Apart from that, we've held webinars on employment guidance, immigration, mindfulness, COVID-19 test and trace, and all done by the expertise knowledge which we have in our committee. And one of the recent seminars was to do with the Sri Lanka High Commission about the IT industry and getting investors out to Sri Lanka. And that was attended by over 100 people. So that's just a flavor of the work we do. I don't want to drag on too much, but please get in touch with any other exco or go into our website to find out more. Right, before I hand it over to Gihanta Jayasinghe is the project lead. Few housekeeping things. So can you all mute yourselves? Only the speakers will be unmuted. You can turn your cameras off as well. During the Q&A sessions, if you put your questions in the chat button, in the chat box, so even while the presenter, you can put it in the chat box, and then Gihanta, who will be moderating this, will be taking up the questions, and hopefully Professor Ravi will take them and answer your queries. So hopefully it should be done done in the next 30 to 45 minutes. And, thank you very much for your support. We've got about 75 people online, which is great. Okay, Gihanta, your show's yours now. Over to you.
Right. Thank you very much, Tushara, and congratulations on becoming the new president of APSL. And really well done to Mahesh for having led the organization during the last 2 years. We welcome Professor Ravi Silva, who's giving us his time this afternoon. We're really looking forward to his really interesting talk. May I say, in a traditional way, Ayubowan, Vanakkam, Assalamu alaikum, and also wish everybody a very pleasant morning, afternoon, and evening, because we have a worldwide audience stretching from the US to Europe, to Sri Lanka, and even out to Japan. So it is really very energizing, hugely energizing, to really engage with like-minded Sri Lankans all over the world who care deeply about the welfare and the prosperity of our country. And that's what unites us. We care about Sri Lanka. We want to make a difference. And this is why we're dialing in. We really are waiting to hear from our eminent scientist, Professor Ravi Silva, but may I take a bit of time ahead of that to briefly outline to you APSL's We Sri Lanka initiative, the banner that we have organized this webinar through. So a little bit about our beginnings. Following the conflict, which ended in May 2019, people in Sri Lanka looked forward to a time of peace and stability and unity, and of course, the prosperity that comes from peace. But absence of violence does not guarantee peace. And so for long-lasting peace, we have to continue to overcome historic prejudices, not just prejudices during the war, but we're talking about prejudice that's lasted thousands of years. So these things cannot be resolved overnight, but little by little, we can do a lot to end prejudice and to have reconciliation and go forward. And most importantly, it's about the coming together of the hearts and minds of all Sri Lankans, supported and strengthened by economic prosperity, which of course will come when we have peace and when we have forward thinking. So to achieve this, we launched the We Sri Lanka initiative in 2010, and our activities are three-pronged. They are about reconnecting, rebuilding, and reconciling. So in 2010, 11, and 12, after the end of the war, we organized annual events to encourage different Sri Lankan communities in the UK to reconnect with each other. We celebrated our diverse culture, our heartwarming cuisine. We listened to talks and panel discussions, and we had conversations about the issues that divided us, but also how we can come together to move forward. So that was reconnecting through the events. And these events then became a platform, raise funds to support the post-conflict rebuilding effort in Sri Lanka. And our initiatives included providing artificial limbs to disabled people, relief for war-affected orphans and widows, educational scholarships, and improving IT equipment in conflict-affected areas. And we also pledged to extend our solar village program to a conflict-affected village in the Vanni. And as Mahesh mentioned earlier, and also Gayani, we completed that project at the back end of last year. I want to make a special mention of Professor Dharme, who is the brainchild of the solar village concept. And really pleased that we were able to extend this program to a very remote area of Sri Lanka, a war-affected area. And today, that solar roof is providing illumination to the community center where children are studying, but also the roof will be generating supplementary income to meet the essential needs of the displaced families that were resettled there after the previous conflict. And so, as Tushar mentioned, we are really investing in the future of this community. So if you'd like to support any of these projects, including extending the Solar Village program to other parts of Sri Lanka, not just in conflict-affected areas, but other parts of Sri Lanka where there are deserving villagers that need help, please get in touch with us. Please write to wesrilanka@apsl.org.uk. Third pillar also of the We Sri Lanka program was reconciling. So this is about overcoming the historic prejudices, building strong understanding, and building trust and a more durable peace. So here we listen to talks from the Northern Ireland Office, the Sri Lanka High Commission, and the Commonwealth Secretariat about peace building, about economic cooperation, and the development of a more inclusive, plural society. We also listened to activists from the Sinhala, Tamil, Muslim, and Burgher communities living in the UK, and very importantly, young people. I think somebody from our audience talked about the importance of young people and bringing them on board. So we had groups of young people who had from second-generation British Sri Lankan families who were visiting Sri Lanka, and their perspectives about how to bring about reconciliation and lasting change. We are now in 2020, and the situation is changing. Obviously, COVID is something we have to think about. It's not rebuilding after the war now, it's rebuilding after COVID. So APSL, of course, is doing some fantastic work outside of this project through the many other projects and initiatives that were discussed earlier to support the situation in Sri Lanka. But with the pandemic limiting face-to-face interaction, the We Sri Lanka initiative kicked off a new webinar series to continue to engage with like-minded Sri Lankans. And our aim here is to build a global community for the sustainable development of Sri Lanka whilst fostering a shared inclusive future. And there are two main themes here. One is sustainable development, because we know that outside of COVID, the next big crisis the crisis is already here, but of course, COVID means we have been distracted by that. But climate change is obviously, there is a disaster that is coming our way unless we curb global warming, reduce carbon emissions, and protect our biodiversity. So the sustainable development, along with building an inclusive future for Sri Lanka, is the aim of this webinar series. Now, our inaugural speaker was the eminent American immigration lawyer, George Welly, and he gave a talk about an anatomy of a Sri Lankan reconciliation, a very inspiring talk. And the key lessons that came from that talk was about how Sri Lankan professionals around the world can collaborate more, develop a consensus about how reconciliation can be integrated into economic development. And that is a very key point, which I'm having discussions with him about how we can develop a very tangible framework. And once we have a stronger consensus around that and direction, certainly it's something we will talk about more. But he also mentioned the importance of shedding ethnic chauvinism, about celebrating the contribution and aspirations of all Sri Lankans from different backgrounds, celebrating their literature, culture, education, and of course, our proud heritage. We also talked about in the webinar about securing the support of the Sri Lankan political leadership, the clergy, especially the Buddhist clergy, to strengthen reconciliation and inclusivity, and celebrate common cultural festivals like what I call the Sri Lankan New Year, which is of course traditionally known as the Sinhala and Tamil New Year. So that was the webinar we had in January. And so today, to continue this series, we have today our eminent speaker, Professor Ravi Silva, who will be talking more about sustainable development. So to introduce Professor Silva, which was really a massive challenge for me, because it's an amazing a list of achievements that he has to his credit. So I will summarize as best as I could. Professor Silva is the professor of solid state electronics. He's a director of the Advanced Technology Institute, multidisciplinary research institute of electronic engineers, physicists, chemists, and material scientists. He's also the director of the Nano-Electronics Center, all at the University of Surrey. He is also or has received this accolade, distinguished professor at the University of Surrey, the Hubei University in China, Zhengzhou University in China, and the Seonbuk National University in Korea. So he's widely recognized for his expertise. He's had numerous positions at the Sri Lanka National Science Foundation on nanotechnology, the Ministry of Science and Technology in Sri Lanka. Over here in the UK, the Crossbench House of Commons and House of Lords Nanotechnology Task Force, and the Royal Academy of Engineering and the Royal Society of Engineering. And apart from his sort of holding all these positions, preeminent positions, he's also spun off 2 companies specializing in nanotechnology. Professor Silva has received numerous prizes for his contributions in civil, material, and electrical engineering, experimental physics, material enterprise, integrated electronics, nano-electronics, and solar cell research. He's won awards for Young Scientist of the Year, Most Enterprising Scientist, and secured fellowships with the Royal Society of Arts, the Royal Academy of Engineering, and the National Academy of Sciences, Sri Lanka. I mean, it's amazing. He has supervised some 75 PhD students, 80 postdoctoral researchers, published over 600 papers in prestigious international journals, and made over 600 presentations at international conferences. He's also an editor of a journal on energy and environmental materials. So recognizing this contribution to science, to research, to engineering, he's been awarded the President's Award from the government of Sri Lanka, and also very recently the CBE for services to science, education, and research by Her Majesty the Queen through the New Year's Honours List in 2021. So yes, I mean, amazing knowledge and contribution to uplift science and research in both in the UK and Sri Lanka. But today he joins us to talk about a very important subject, sustainable development and the role of renewable energy, particularly as we try to avert global warming. This is an incredibly important year. It's a year of COP26 with, well, depending on how the COVID situation unfolds, we're expecting leaders of over 150 countries to come to the UK to really shape the future of climate change. So it is my great pleasure to invite Professor Ravi Silva to talk to you about a route to a sustainable future in Sri Lanka and the role of renewable energy. Over to you, Ravi.
Thank you, Gihanta. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'll try and do my best to live up to all those accolades that were given. But before starting, let me thank the APSL EXCO, in particular the President and Gihanta, for the honor of giving the second lecture of this series. I was present at the first lecture given by George Willie, which was wonderful to hear, because it showed how much more we can achieve by working together as a one nation, one country. And it really inspired many people who were there to make sure they work together in the future with organizations such as APSL to deliver things. As Gihanta said, the topic that I've chosen today is hugely significant. Much like reconciliation, climate change does not believe in borders. Our emissions that happen in Sri Lanka, the United Kingdom, the US, China, or anywhere in the world goes to the same atmosphere. And as a result, we all have to live within that particular environment. So the title I have today is A Route to a Sustainable Future in Sri Lanka Through Renewable Energy. And this will be given in a number of different components. But to start off with, as an engineer, you really need to have some definitions to work with. And taking that word sustainable and what sustainable development is quite important. According to the Brundtland report, the definition associated with sustainability and sustainable development is what the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own. This is very critical because what this definition indicates is it's not just the economic aspect or the social aspect or the environmental aspect alone that needs to be addressed. It's all three of them. It's even more significant because what it means is there is a responsibility of the policymakers, the governors of these various nations to be able to deliver an equitable, bearable, viable society for all of its people. And this is something that we need to make sure we keep the governments to task with. As a result, organizations such as the United Nations have come up with frameworks that enable sustainable development to be examined and viewed in terms of its development activities. And until 2015, there was a set of goals called the Millennium Development Goals that were set up in order to make us live in a more viable and sustainable environment. And since 2015, they were replaced by the SDGs, the 17 SDGs that you see here. Now, these 17 SDGs are hugely complex. They move from poverty to education, to clean water, to decent living standards, to have equitable life, peace, justice, and strong institutions, good quality air, good quality water, both above and below in terms of sea life. So it's a very, very complex need that we need to talk about when we talk about sustainable development. And in that sense, I will cover just one aspect of it in looking at these sustainable activities, but I think it is probably the most important of the sustainable activities that are needed. Furthermore, we heard in Gihantha's review of George Willie's talk, the importance of heritage. And I think we need to make sure heritage too is part of those sustainable activities, because what are we if we are not coming down from the past with a heritage behind us? In some cases, this is fairly straightforward. In the diagrams, you can see the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, and this clearly is a natural beauty spot. You've got Houghton Plains in Sri Lanka here. I've also shown here the white knights that you will see in St. Petersburg. And some say the gambling in Macau is also considered a national heritage. In fact, it did get heritage status within the UN. Now, I want you to stretch that heritage aspect even further, because these are all tangible. We heard within the SDGs, water and air is covered. But what about light? Isn't that something also that we should consider within this heritage that we have? And the importance of this will become prevalent as we go through the next few slides. So within the outline, I will discuss this very eclectic mix and how do we go about trying to identify what are the most important elements to have a sustainable future. I'll use a couple of slides to say something about my own institution and then move on to looking at energy and powering the world in a more generic manner. Also identify the lethargy associated with this and how there is change that is needed, even when you know the outcomes are existential. I will introduce then the case for carbon net zero, which has been one of the major activities that all of us are looking forward to. And as Gihanta said, we have COP26 happening in August in Glasgow, and this will be #1 priority. And then talk about energy and why this is not just simply a supply and demand activity. Moving on, we look at the renewable energy fit to the different landscape and end by concentrating on the Sri Lankan situation and whether this is a route towards a sustainable society. So from my own organization's perspective, we are a technology-based university within the UK. We've got about 16,000 students within our institute. And the big blue building that you see here is basically the Advanced Technology Institute, for which I'm the director. We've got about 160 researchers looking at different types of technology solutions, both experimental and theoretical. And we go from the designer stage all the way onto the practical end of things. As a university, we are very well known, associated with Surrey satellites. Within the university, we probably built in excess of 40 satellites that are whizzing around the world at present. We've got a very strong water research activity. We've got a 5G national center. And my own center, the Advanced Technology Institute, was honored by the Queen also in getting a Queen's Anniversary Award for our work associated with optoelectronics. Now, my own group did make the headlines, and it was made the headlines on something based on nanotechnology. But what we did was we applied these materials called Vanta Black based on carbon nanotubes to much larger objects. Effectively, what we were able to show was that even when we design things in the nanoscale, we can have effects that are much more generic in the macroscopic end of things. And as a result, we were able to apply our nano coatings on this building, which was from the Winter Olympics in South Korea, in Pyongyang. And it was called the darkest building on earth. It was the Hyundai Pavilion. And that was coated with the material that came out of my lab. That's through a company called Surrey Nanosystems. And it has been applied on different cars, and it was part of the Munich Motor Show before COVID. There are some other practical aspects also associated with it. But what I wanted to show was that by designing things at the nanoscale, you actually can have applications in a much larger building type environment. So the scales you design may be in the nano, but its effects are in the square meters and kilometers. It also should be a good example to us that all our actions as humans do have implications that are far wider, and therefore do not ever think what you can do is not significant, because the impact can be most significant. Moving on to my theme, I'd like to take you back a few centuries to thinking about how industrialization and how development came about. If we look to the point at which civilizations came and then much larger communal activities arose, it came through the industrial revolutions that began in the United Kingdom, the first industrial revolution in the 1780s, moving on to the second industrial revolution in the mid 1900s, followed by the third within the United States that was based on electrical engines, heavy chemicals, automobiles, and then the fourth, the electronic, associated with the Pacific Basin. We are expecting the fifth industrial revolution probably associated with nanotechnology and plastic electronics that is still maturing. What is common in all of these is the fact that energy, the energy to be able to make change, that includes running of your steel mills, running of your textile machinery, being able to produce railways, being able to produce electrical goods, and in the future, the knowledge to make things that are small. So energy and knowledge is absolutely central in order to have development. Now, interestingly, if we take development from a societal point of view and examine humanity and different countries, some would say it's possible that the GDP has some connectivity with that the richer the nation is from its societal perspective, the higher the possibility of producing goods. And what is interesting is that if you compare the GDP per capita with the energy use per capita in a country, what appears to happen is a linear relationship. Now, this is surprising in a way, but not completely out of the ordinary, because we know there's a certain threshold that you need in order to be able to live happily. But once you have gone beyond that threshold, you can start using that for other activities that help you develop your mind and soul, and donations, as it were, talked about in developing other people's activities also going forward. But what is surprising here is the fact that the GDP is proportionate to the energy use, or the energy use is proportionate to the GDP. So maybe this is something within the sustainability landscape that has been slightly overlooked, that maybe it's energy sustainability that we need to look at first if we then want to transpose that into GDP as well as quality of life. Now, if we start looking at the energy mix, for the last 20 years or more, we've realized that we need to decarbonize. I'm just illustrating the lethargy associated with the system, not just in Sri Lanka, but this is worldwide. It's not a Sri Lankan problem. The primary energy mix in 2010 worldwide was around 80% fossil fuel based, coal, petroleum, natural gas, and 20% green. Out of the 20% green, 10% was nuclear and the other 10% renewable energy. Now, if you whiz forward a decade, and whether you look at 2017 or 2018, you look at the energy mix again, whether it's the US or the world, once more, you still have that 80% based on fossil fuels and roughly 20% based on renewable technologies. Now, is this something bad, or why is it that we are stuck here? If you look at that more in terms of a diagram, what you notice is that all of these fossil fuels end up polluting the environment that we are living in. It does provide us the energy that is needed, but it also adds to the pollution level. And despite all of the change that has been happening with new types of renewable energy coming on board, the change has not been significant enough to impact the world scenario. So with this fossil fuel glut that keeps moving on and on, there is roughly 40 billion tons of CO2 being emitted into the environment on an annual basis. This is not sustainable. We have breached the 380 parts per million that was thought to be the point of no return. At present, we are probably around 420 parts per million. So this is not good news for us. And as a result, there is a huge amount of effort now in the drive to control this. Now, the main reason why this is disastrous for us is that if we look at the data for around 100,000 years, and I've just taken 150 years here, what you notice is there is a correlation between CO2 emissions. So CO2 emissions are shown here in this graph, and the temperature change shown in the graph axis on the right. So the blue line shows how the CO2 emissions have risen from the pre-industrial stage all the way beyond the 300 mark around 1940, and then continued to rise. And with the CO2 increase, what we are seeing is this change in temperature, and there is no doubt there is a relationship between the temperature rise that we see and CO2 levels. So that is something that I'll come back to, and that's something that is worrying the world tremendously. With increased CO2 levels, it brings around climate change. The climate change that we are seeing is having unparalleled effects around the world and in a very short period of time. We are seeing changes within the glaciers on a weekly, daily basis. We are seeing hailstorms, snowstorms in Mexico, typhoons, storms. All of these activities are taking place due to this sudden change occurring as a result of climate change. So now let me briefly introduce to you this concept of carbon net zero. Effectively, the whole idea of carbon net zero came about after the COP21 Paris Accord, where the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, was asked to define what net zero was. And what net zero meant was that we need to come to a point where the anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions that we are emitting balance the anthropogenic removal of those greenhouse gases. So the current state is shown here on your left, where at present we are emitting way too much greenhouse gases, and as you've seen earlier, 40 tons of CO2, whereas the removal has stayed steady and there is an imbalance. What we want to get to is the image on the right here, where there is a balance or net zero of anthropogenic gas emissions with those that are being removed. And the anthropogenic gases that are being removed purely based on farms, based on large forests, based on CO2 capture within your oceans, and the possibility of removing sequestration of this. But what has become uncontrolled has been the emission of CO2, and the main reason for the emission of CO2 is energy. Of that energy usage, 80% of world energy is still based on fossil fuels, and all fossil fuels give out CO2, sulfurs, and other greenhouse gases that are not sustainable. So within the declarations that we have, we need to meet this target of balancing things out and getting the right level on a science-based target for greenhouse gas emissions. So this all was elucidated and discussed at COP21, where 196 nations of the world came together and declared that they will try to limit the temperature rises to 2 degrees, but ideally to 1.5 degrees. And as a result, they gave the IPCC the task of coming up with the net zero identification. And as a result, many nations around the world came up with their own commitments, national commitments, in order to deliver the net zero targets. Now, why should we aim for net zero? According to the IPCC, if we want to get to net zero by 2050, that will ensure that the temperature rise is left at only 1.5 degrees. Should the temperature go to 2 degrees rather than 1.5 degrees, the speculation based on scientific data, so it's just an approximation really, is that 11 million more people will be exposed to extreme heat, 61 million people will be exposed to drought, and 10 million more people will be exposed to rising sea levels. Even further, there will be major physical effects, major social and economic effects, together with the global temperature rises, the flooding, the extreme weather conditions, and the desertifications. There will be untold displacement of people, migration, refugee crises, water scarcity, food scarcity. And these are significant damage to the world population and our whole social fabric that we cannot afford to have. So global warming may have been an abstract concept a few years ago. It no longer is. It's something real. The change is quite significant. And I'm just going to show you a few images of this.
Climate change is causing an increase in extreme weather events around the world. Oh my God. From sea level rises to droughts, extreme weather can seriously cripple affected communities. But what is considered an extreme weather event? Extreme weather can be very dramatic, with fire tornadoes, wildfires, severe tropical storms, hurricanes, and cyclones being the prime examples. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, an extreme weather event is an occurrence that is more severe than the historical norm. They point out that even statistically, non-extreme weather events can cause significant damage to economies, societies, ecosystems, and infrastructure. As of 2012, there have been more than 800 major extreme weather events recorded worldwide, causing hundreds of billions of dollars in damage. Other sources, like the UK Met Office, rises show a marked increase in extreme events, which caused loss from just over 200 in 1980 to over 700 in 2015.
So I think you get the picture there as to why it is important for us to try and stop these extreme weather events, stop climate change as much as possible. Now, looking at that and thinking about how we sustain ourselves on Earth, interestingly, life on Earth is sustained by the sun. The sun gives us the energy to go and farm activities, and due to chlorophyll conversion of energy, light from the sun, you can, through photosynthesis, obtain the different vegetation. Tens and thousands of years under high pressure and temperature, some of the farmland, the woods, would convert itself to natural gases, etc. And now we go and mine those, and within seconds remove tens of thousands of years of sequestration of carbon within those fossil fuels. So we need to stop that. We need to start looking at other routes in which to use the energy from the sun to power the planet. And that is the thesis of what I want to talk about, in that we need to find other ways using solar, wind, bio, etc., biomass, in being able to power the planet. Now, is this possible? So scientifically, we need to ask ourselves, is this something that is feasible? Just in order to show that we have done the maths, I can, using black body theory, calculate the amount of energy coming from the sun to the earth. And you use some approximations that within the space environment, it's only radiation that matters, but approximating the sun to a black body and examining the energy that comes out of it, we can calculate that the total energy received on the earth on a daily basis is around 175,000 terawatts of energy. The world as a whole use 15 terawatts of energy daily, right? Just to emphasize that point, 175,000 terawatts comes in, the world only uses 15 terawatts. And that's the reason why we say within 1 hour, the world gets enough, the earth gets enough energy from the sun to run the earth for a whole year. The key here is to be able to capture that energy appropriately. If you want to put it into a different context, the solar energy that comes on the earth is this big yellow box. The total wind energy capacity is this purple box, the biomass, the green box, and you can see the coal, gas, and oil are down here. So solar energy is by far the largest source of potential energy that we have to play with. In terms of, is it feasible to use? 15, 20 years ago, no. But at present, the cost of solar PV shown here is coming down. And as you can see, in a number of occasions, it's actually lower than the price of fossil fuels. So this bar that you see is the cost of fossil fuels, and these are all the different prices associated with solar installations. If we look at the new deployments worldwide, at present, of the nearly 100 gigawatts of new deployments that are taking place, over 50% is associated with solar, with around 32% associated with wind. Just to put this into context, if we could get about 4 gigawatts or 5% of this in Sri Lanka, that will solve all of our energy problems. Now, from the UK point of view, we are doing quite a lot in order to address things with the Climate Change Act, the DEFRA 25-year policy, the 10-point plan, etc. But more importantly, we have some of the lowest prices of solar energy coming worldwide. Just within the last few months, we've seen prices of the order of 1.3 cents per kilowatt hour for solar in the Portuguese government. In Saudi Arabia, that was beaten in April this year at 1.04 cents per kilowatt hour. From a UK perspective, we are now putting cables from Norway to the UK in order to be able to transmit electricity, and that's using the hydro electricity they have. And again, in Brazil also, they have these very cheap energy sources. Now, moving on to energy generation in Sri Lanka and why I think Sri Lanka should be adopting a more stronger policy associated with this. What you see here is the annual solar irradiation of Sri Lanka. And typically speaking, there is enough solar irradiation to run the country many times over. Also seen in the middle is the population density map. And why is that important? Because you don't want to try and put solar arrays in the high density area. And looking at the most complete figures I could get in 2016, this is the mix of energy that we had in Sri Lanka. So hydro constituted about 1.4 gigawatts, thermal 1.1, coal nearly 1 gigawatts, and the renewables was about half a gigawatt. If I were to do some analysis associated with that, with figures of 2015 and 2016 shown here, typically speaking, within Sri Lanka, hydro is by far the most dominant of these energy provision sources. So you've got about 37 or 40% of your energy provided by hydro, with about 10% coming through other renewable sources. So technically speaking, already Sri Lanka has around a 50% renewable energy sector. The other 60% is associated with coal and oil. This puts into effect the various types of energy that is used in Sri Lanka, and in blue is the hydro generation part, which is about 40%. In brown is your oil generation, red coal, and green renewable energy. So at present, the renewable energy sector is not significant. Well, it is significant, but it's of the order of 10% for wind and solar, with hydro that has been existing for a significant amount of time, contributing the rest of the main green energy source. The question really to ask is, can we convert the two areas shown here in brown and red to green energy sources? And the answer is yes, we do need to do that, but there has to be a plan and a suitable drive through the policymakers. If you look at the long-term plan put by the Ceylon Electricity Board, and this is the plan that was called the 2018-2037 LCLG GEP plan. Within that plan, it was identified that for the next 20 years, the Sri Lankan government, by virtue of the Ceylon Electricity Board, was looking to expand their activities within the green energy sector by up to 4 gigawatts or 45%, and then the fossil fuel sector by around 4.6 gigawatts, which composed of 55%. Now, this is something that I don't believe is the best thing for the country. I also believe that you can probably reduce this right the way down, probably close to zero, if there is a will and there is planning associated with the country in order to go towards a total renewable energy activity. Now, according to the numbers that I found by the end of 2016, 2017, there was around 65 megawatts of ground-mounted solar and 60 megawatts of rooftop solar with 7,500 connections, and working with a company, Helios, in India. What was needed was to try and see whether we can come up with a plan that can boost these numbers up significantly. And in 2018, 2019, we came up with a proposal that effectively said that if Sri Lanka really wanted to have its green credentials properly identified, it needs to significantly move from its current linear progression of moving from 65 megawatts to 250 megawatts in a 5-year period, from 60 megawatts rooftop to 150 megawatts, to a much more significant progression. And to do this, what was suggested was a significant investment associated with both ground-mounted plants, and in this case, it was a case of coming up with roughly 50 times 20 megawatt solar farms, in addition to distributed rooftop systems of the order of 200 kilowatts each, 1,500 of those. Now, if you were to go down that route and come up with this strategy, what we were able to show was that we will be able to provide probably around 4,000 gigawatt hours to the grid system. And in our calculation, what we did was we also identified certain areas in which these solar farms, solar parks could take place. And in order to make the numbers and the equations straightforward, what we proposed was 5 plants of roughly 17.5 megawatts each. So effectively 100 megawatt each, and to have 10 of those. So 10 100 megawatt plants will give you your 1 gigawatt. And just to put things into context, if you were to increase the size of this red diamond by 3, that will be enough to run the whole country through just solar energy. We can take these points that have been identified within this map and overlay that with other activities. I'm very happy to say that now within the government, there are 2 activities in Punarin and Monaragala, where there are solar farms of about 100 megawatts being proposed. And these are between the 2019 and 2025 period. So these are active projects that are going ahead. So it looks like it wasn't too far from where initially the idea was, so Kilinochi to Punarin there. And here it looks like it's close to Lahugala. We can also overlay that with the population maps. But what this showed was that there has to be a will within the governance structure to be able to progress this sort of activity if we wanted to have the possibility of a totally green energy source. I'm very happy to say that from a government's perspective, they have now released plans to go towards an 80% renewable energy target. This is just a target, and I believe, as I do not have any further information, I don't know what practical applications or implementation of the program that has taken place, but should the government follow through in the plans of creating up to 11 gigawatts of renewable energy, broken down into 5 gigawatts of solar, 3 gigawatts of wind, and a further 1.5 gigawatts of hydro, this would be a fantastic position to be in. This would not just reduce the cost of production, it would also certainly help the population and society to grow better, particularly to grow out of COVID and some of the other problems that we currently face. But the key here is the governance structure and the will of the ruling parties to push through this change. With that scenario in mind, by 2030, the promise is that there will be up to 12 gigawatts capacity of renewable energy that is provided, with a lot of analysis associated with how the grid system is going to cope with these intermittent sources. One thing is for sure, due to the fact that we have hydro, if we have enough solar farms around the country during the day hours, it's very easy to pump water up to pumped hydro and therefore use that as your base level. So we no longer need to have this black color coal line or the orange thermal and oil line, because that should be replaced with hydro and the rest provided through green energy sources. So there is much ambition within the plans that have been put, but really the proof is when this is going to be implemented. Now, from a worldwide perspective, just to put things into context, the same sort of greening is being looked at. And from a worldwide perspective, if we were to have these squares that have been identified within these different maps in the distributed manner, that all sums up to the total amount of power needed to run the world. So again, once more from a world perspective, also powering the world with solar energy is feasible. I'm going to end with a few slides as to what we are trying to do to make that possible and democratize energy. And at present, although solar cells are cheap, we are trying to make that even cheaper. We are trying to reduce the thickness of your standard solar cell from 100 microns down to 100 nanometers by mixing materials that are organics and inorganics. And these will be in the form of paints, and these paints can be sprayed. We are working with the European Union to make these large spraying machines that have got monitoring heads, and through projects such as Smartronics, Cornet, and Musicode, we are making these solar cells. And these will then be applied to large installations that you see here. And these solar cells will be probably around 20% or less the cost of the current silicon solar cells. Finally, we are also working on perovskite solar cells, and this is meant to be the next generation beyond this current route. So with that, I'd like to conclude to say that for a sustainable society in Sri Lanka, we need to have energy security and security of supply. Once we have that, I think there will be many other activities that follow. We also need to think of our heritage, and I believe the sunlight that we have around us in Sri Lanka and in the rest of the world should be treated as one of those and be used for renewable energy generation. Solar electricity is happening, and it will happen everywhere pretty soon. Within the UK, we've got a 350 megawatt Cleve Hill plant that has been given permission by the government now. We certainly have far more available energy from the sun than what we can use. And this is really about technology innovation that can come through. Sri Lanka has the ideal geology to be able to not just produce the solar energy, but also have the storage through their hydroelectric system. So this is an ideal way to empower its people for a future sustainable society. So with that, I thank you for your attention, and I'm very happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ravi. That was a really comprehensive talk. I really like the way you connected the pieces, connected the dots. You mentioned about the climate crisis we're facing and the severe weather. That's how you started, I believe, the presentation. You linked that to the rise of global warming and the key contributing factor to that being CO2 emissions, and how the emissions from how we use energy, the fossil fuels, is creating that increase in carbon dioxide levels, driving the climate change, driving the increase in temperature. And then you link that to how we can reverse that by reducing our dependence on fossil fuels and investing more in renewable energy, and also clearly saying that there is the capability to do that. We have the power of the sun. I mean, quite amazing. I think you mentioned that the energy that the sun radiates within a day could power the world for a year. Is that correct? I'm not sure, but something to that magnitude. So may I then ask a question there? If that is the case, that there is so much of energy from the sun that can power the world for a year, why is it that it hasn't happened till now? What has been the issue that we have not been able to harness the sun more effectively? And why did we have to then, is it a lack of technology? Is it cost, that we had to rely on an ineffective way of depending on fossil fuels to drive, to produce our energy?
It's a great question, Gihant, and I think it's something that really has the answer within the history of mankind. But effectively, humanity has generally used the path of least resistance in order to do things. And this is purely a case of the easiest way of producing your energy was to burn coal or to burn wood. So as a result, humanity got used to using first biomass, wood, and then beyond that, the oil, and then the gas in order to create its energy. And because you were able to create a system of obtaining that and a whole infrastructure for gas and oil, the exploitation of solar energy was left behind. So it's only recently that we have started utilizing the fact that we need to start technology and science to be able to exploit the energy that is coming. And I think, in a sense, we have to thank Obama, President Obama, who created the Sunshot Challenge that started this process of trying to reduce the cost of solar energy to below $1 per watt. And now the cost is less than 5 cents per dollar. And that's why it'll come in through. But much like established technologies, I don't think oil and gas will easily give over. So there will be quite a lot of pains to bring in the new technologies. And it's particularly important that governments put in a lot of money into this particular activity. So within the UK itself, there is a report after many years of lobbying that came out last year that said solar and wind are cheaper than any other technology available. But yet the government wants to put in money to the nuclear area. So once more, there are lobbies that lobby for different areas, and you need an energy mix. So due to that, it's good to have the full breadth of energy systems available due to the intermittency of solar and wind. But the prediction is that within the next 30 years, we will probably be looking at 80% solar in most developed countries and 20% fossil fuels. you're muted.
Thank you very much, Ravi, for that. Yes. Second related question then. So with Sri Lanka, clearly we have a lot of sun. You've shown the population density maps and so where the sun is available. I mean, it's all over the island. We are already having 50% renewables because of hydro. But and you also mentioned that the cost of solar is coming down significantly. But how do we finance that transition to renewable energy? Where are you, even though the cost is coming down, we are talking about significantly different infrastructure. And do you have any thoughts about how that could be best financed and the best way that it can be achieved?
Well, I think the simple answer to that is that if anyone is doing any new plants, it should be renewable energy based. So right. A classic example is worldwide, there is no more nuclear plants being set up other than in the UK and probably France, because France has a nuclear industry that is very strong. Basically, solar technology and wind have overtaken all of the other types of technology in terms of new infrastructure simply because it's cheaper.
Right.
But it's clear that once you do bring that in, you do need to have a new storage element brought in, and you need to have new smart grids that are able to cope with the intermittency associated with those systems. So it needs a certain amount of bravery from the technologies, but it is coming through. In Germany, you do have months now in which you would run on pure renewable energy.
Great.
And Gihante and Ravi, could I come in for a comment?
Yes, go ahead, Darbe.
On the same subject, I think we have about 70 people here, Sri Lankan, interested. I think in Ravi's first of all, Ravi, thank you very much for your informative, useful, and sometimes frightening information during the presentation. It's a brilliant presentation. Thank you. What I want to make in one of your pie charts, nuclear energy came as a green energy. This is something the nuclear technologists bring to the world. They hide 10 years of cost and emission during the building of the power plant. And also, I agree, during the power production, it is green. But when it comes to decommissioning, 100 years of cost and emission, they hide. They hide both the 10 years of building and 100 years of decommissioning. And in fact, Sri Lanka is under pressure from 3 countries. South Korea came in 2009 to bring a nuclear plant to Sri Lanka. And China and Russia now trying to sell a nuclear plant to Sri Lanka. I think we all professionals have to be very careful, because in Sri Lanka, we are blessed with renewables. But when it comes to our ruling parties, they don't have technology knowledge. They are looking at the cost. When they say it is 50 billion for a nuclear plant, they love it. And in Sri Lanka, we don't have the professional management or professional security for a nuclear plant. It is okay for a developed country, but nuclear plant for Sri Lanka is a real disaster. We all have to look into this. We all have to educate people, and that we need to remember, because we are blessed with solar, hydro, wind, and biomass. We can power the whole country with those safe energy systems rather than dangerous ones. Thank you.
Thank you, Dharmi. That is fantastic. You made the point beautifully there. The decommissioning costs of some of the nuclear plants at the moment go up to 3 to 5 billion pounds, right? So Hinkley Point C cost 22 billion to the consumers. It'll cost another 20 billion to run it.
Yes.
The cost of energy there is 92.5 pounds per megawatt hour, when you can buy solar at 15 pounds per megawatt hour. Exactly. So there is no logic at all in the UK going down the nuclear route, other than it has a heritage that it wants to preserve in nuclear engineering.
Exactly. One senior engineer came from the north of England. He has worked all his life in a nuclear plant. He came and gave a talk in my university, and he said it takes 100 years to decommission this system. We don't know how to find that money. How can Sri Lanka find the money for that? I think we need to, these people, these nuclear technologists, come and try to talk to our political leaders, try to sell them. I know that in 2009 in Geneva, they signed for a feasibility study to bring a nuclear plant to Sri Lanka in 2025. And we are the people through APSL wrote to the president saying that this is not a right technology for Sri Lanka. So I think it is our responsibility to look at these things and when necessary, collectively raise these issues to the political leaders. Thank you. I will stop there.
Okay, so Darve, thank you very much. Ravi, we have a steady flow of questions. Would you have a little bit more time available this afternoon to take questions?
Absolutely, please go ahead.
Okay, so the first question is, I will read it out. How can Sri Lanka's diaspora communities in Britain and around the world work with Professor Ravi Silva, the Surrey University's Advanced Technology Institute, SLINTech, private sector investors, the UK and Sri Lankan government to bring renewable solar and other technologies to the point where they can be implemented to impact the lives of ordinary people everywhere?
That's a fabulous sentiment, and thank you for the question. That's exactly what we all want to happen. It's a very
and it's from Amal Abevodana, Professor. Yeah.
Like, so Amal, I think that's absolutely where we want to go. The only way I think that will happen is by us pressuring the government through whatever means possible that they need to not think short term, but long term, clean, green energy here. I think it's very, very important that all of the various ministries also work together, because what people don't realize is unless you have high technology within the country producing value-added goods, we will always be a supplier of cheap labor effectively. We really need to move up the value chain, and the first rung of that value chain is get your energy situation right. At present, we are spending billions of rupees in bringing down oil and coal and just firing it up for energy. So if we can start at the source. So I hope with the current government and their view of going to 80% renewable, that this can be achieved, but it will need the political will. I do not know how we change political will because that's not my area of expertise, sorry.
But there's a very related question. I'm going to bring this here, Ravi. It says, very thought-provoking speech. This is from Anuradha Samrasinghe, one of our EXCO members. My question is, how do you as a non-member see how else organizations like us can act as vehicle catalysts to link expat knowledge and the knowledge base in Sri Lanka? So in other words, if we need to have change, political, the change from the leadership to drive home that transition to renewable energy, what can we as expatriates and professionals around the world, what can we do to achieve that?
I think it's very important that the expat community and particularly the professional expat community work together to make sure the High Commissioner conveys the right message back, because the whole term of His Excellency comes from the point that the High Commissioner is only responsible to the President of the country. The President is the line manager of the High Commissioner. So by definition, if the expats who are the professionals lobby the High Commissioner and inform them how important this is, and this is based on a scientific argument as opposed to anything else,
Yes.
it means that there has to be that taken into account. So I absolutely note that it is not the most straightforward of applications, but there are many ministers who are very passionate about the country, who will do what is needed in order for Sri Lanka to become more sustainable and green. We just need to work with the right people in that endeavor.
Thank you, Ravi. Okay, I'm just trying to catch up on some of this. Okay, another question is, how do we, this is a question from Ajit Veerasinghe, how do we entice local entrepreneurs to invest in PV power plants? I'll repeat that question. How do we entice local entrepreneurs to invest in PV power plants?
A very good question. So I think the government once more have started the process, and this is something that is dear to my heart. I am trying to work with a group in order to make things more easily accessible. So one of the things that we managed to do was to convince the government that if they are to entice people to come in, particularly foreign investments, they need to make it easier and more feasible. So in order to do that, we need to make sure these solar farms, the land is given to the person who brings the solar technology in, a connection is given directly to the person, and a price is given for the solar electricity that is fed into the grid. And at the present time, one of the biggest problems in bringing major players in, and I think that was another question that was asked, how do we bring the biggest players in? I could probably bring in 2 or 3 of the largest companies in China to Sri Lanka, but they will not move unless they have a package of 200 megawatts or larger. And at the moment, the total capacity of Punarin and Monaragala would probably be of the order of 100, and the government is still looking at packets of 50, probably 10 and 20 megawatts. It has to be large for the big companies to get their cost benefits within the process. By doing that, you can actually drop the cost of your electricity down to the 2-3 cents US cents per kilowatt hour. Without doing that, your cost of solar will still be of the order of 8 rupees or 9 rupees currently, which is close to par with what the government will give you for the solar tariff.
That's very interesting. So you mentioned about the importance of bringing scale, large companies, to drive down the cost of solar energy. But there is an opposing argument about, the renewable energy, particularly solar, is an opportunity to democratize energy production and give smallholders or families through solar roofs the opportunity to, in one way, generate renewable energy, but also income. What are your thoughts about that?
It's a very good point. I think it works both ways. The larger systems is for the nation, the industries, the commerce to be able to get cheap energy. Because at the moment, the energy cost is too high in Sri Lanka. And again, I believe that the government is also subsidizing it because the cost of oil is so high in some instances. So as a result, it costs the treasury money to provide the solar at the cost, provide the electricity at the cost that it's being given. Now, if we are able to find an energy source that is cheaper, and clearly your raw material from a solar cell is zero, it means that technically you're paying just for the cost of the plant. And once you have made up the cost of the plant, and in the current scenarios, most often the payback time is probably less than 10 years, whereas previously you're looking at 25 years associated with payback on these solar cell systems. So it works both ways. So firstly, you can get the larger system in place so that you have energy provision for the rest of the country for its commerce and industry, but
yes,
also from the smallholder point of view, putting 1.5 or 1 to 1.5 kilowatt peak system on your rooftop will become much cheaper, but you will be paying slightly above the rate that you would be able to provide a solar farm with, simply because it's a bit like the retail sector. The smaller the amount you buy, the higher the price you pay, because you've got all the various in-between sources.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Ravi. Another interesting question is, this is from Mahendra Gunasekara. He asks, in addition to Ravi's response, historically renewable energy has not been able to be stored properly, which has limited its use due to energy from renewable energy not being available at time of consumption. And actually, you mentioned earlier a link to the hydro capacity and storage. So could you maybe respond to that question? Yeah.
That's a very good point, and I think that's absolutely correct. Previously, the whole idea was that if you had solar, you had to use it at point of generation, and particularly feeding it back through a two-way system into the grid was not difficult unless you have a very stable grid system.
Yeah.
I think the beauty at the moment is that for Sri Lanka, because we already have up to 40% hydro within the country that is distributed around the country, you should be able to find a close enough hydropower station in which any excess energy that you have can be used to pump water up. So by pumping water up, your hydropower station, when you have too much solar electricity produced, it means that you can use the pumped hydro effectively as your reserve or store for energy.
I see. So that's by, again, when you require the energy, then you pump the water down and
well, you allow the water to flow and through your turbines
and create electricity, right? No, very good. Thank you. So actually solar and hydro go hand in hand.
It is the best combination possible, and that's why the country really is the pearl when it comes to solar energy production.
Yes.
Because it has everything needed. It's got a beautiful hill country that is perfect for hydroelectric.
Fantastic! Wow, what a combination.
Could I add one more point on that, Ravi?
Please go ahead.
If we have enough solar during the daytime, you run with solar energy and close the water and use the water during the night time, because you can't do that with coal power station. You can't cool it down and open it up. But in the case of hydroelectricity, you can just close the tap and open the tap when you want. So this combination is a brilliant combination for Sri Lanka.
It's even better because of the hill country in the center. It means all of the country, all around the country can reap the benefits. So
Exactly.
Because you have water flows in every direction possible. So therefore, you can decentralize the energy provision in the country so that you have smart local grids that provide the energy that is needed. So this really is the way forward. It's a bit like devolving power also, but this is devolving the electricity generation in order to be able to have a better, larger system in place.
Professor Ravi Silva, am I right in thinking that in Wales they are already using hydropower in that particular way? They are not using solar power, but they are pumping water when they have excess electricity, and then they use that excess water later at night to generate electricity. I believe that's happening already in Wales, in the UK.
Yes, there are a number of plants, and I think the most important thing is the tidal energy also. So they are basically not looking at solar, but what they're doing, the excess is coming through the tidal movement. So they've got something like 2-3 meter movement when the tides come in and out, and they're making a lot of energy through the tidal systems there. So it is certainly something that is possible. And again, if we want to think of technology and going forward, we'd all talk about lithium-ion batteries. There's a whole area of sodium-ion batteries that is there. And when you start thinking of sodium, you start thinking of seawater. So there is a view that you potentially can use seawater as an electrolyte that is suitable for energy storage also of the future. So once more, it could really engage the research sector of the Sri Lankan universities to start contributing in something that is really needed for Mother Lanka.
May I ask a very quick question from Professor Ravi Silva? Thank you very much for a very enlightening presentation. That was really great. And also I thank you, Professor Dharmadasa, for raising the issue about the nuclear power. Now in Sri Lanka, there are lots of intelligent, very clever people. So they have no problem in understanding technical issues. Is there perhaps an opportunity in Sri Lanka. Perhaps we should increase the skills relating to management of projects and problem solving in Sri Lanka, in addition to the technical skills.
I absolutely agree with you, Kirti. I think this is probably a #1 priority in our school kids also coming through. Solving problems has to be part and parcel of probably the curriculum that we put into the system from a small age. And maybe this is again something where APSL can use it influence in terms of changing the curriculum for schools. Because again, in this modern world, it's really no point looking at certain historic relationships that are 20, 30 years before, but it's better to look at the present and how do you solve problems in the current environment. So there needs to be a new methodology, a new type of pedagogy brought in to how teaching is done within the curriculum. And again, this is something that goes beyond the technology bounds in what students, school kids are taught within their schools.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Kirti, very much for your very important question. So maybe we have a few more minutes and then we will close. Terence, would you like to unmute yourself? Yes.
Yeah, sure. Professor Ravi, thank you very much for that insightful presentation. Really enjoyed that. I'm very interested in your research on nano painting for generating new form of solar energy and so on. I was wondering, as you know, that currently we are thinking of centralized power stations. Yeah, so that means we had to depend on the government, we had to depend on the people investing in creating this kind of infrastructure and so on. But I was wondering whether your technology will be disruptive to that kind of a way of thinking, because that means as citizens, we should be able to use your nanotechnology to create our own power within our house and also go into more distributed power generation model. I was wondering when your technology will be available so we can somehow promote a distributed, community-based kind of power generation in a country like Sri Lanka.
Yeah, thank you very much, Terence, for that question. It's absolutely where we want to go. And it also is central to Gihanta's comment on democratizing energy. My personal view is that by 2035, the cost of electricity will be so cheap, you wouldn't need to pay for it anymore. But what you would be paying for is the connection. So it's like mobile data on your phone. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, you were given 100 megabits or a gigabit of data. And once you finish the data, you had to top up. Now you are a connection with a certain bandwidth that is given. So in the future also, the cost of electricity will be probably less than 1 cent per kilowatt hour to the plug. And as a result, it'll be cheaper just to give you that and then charge for how much you use in terms of power. So the democratization will absolutely come in when we start doing this, because householders then can decide how much of energy they take from the supplier versus your own local activity. And in the future, it has to go down to smart grids. So from an electronic engineer's perspective, we have to start thinking of smart local grids where you decentralize all of the power provision. And it's also likely that it's not a single household, but householders start working together, 10 houses or a building, each of them working together in order to manage their power provision. And I think that's where it's going within the next 10 years. And it's going to be really exciting and interesting. Our technology is available, but I don't think is at the point where it can be sold to people. We can make the panels, but it doesn't have the lifetime that is needed. We probably need another 3-4 years of proper testing in order for it to become available at the B&Q and various other places. But it certainly is currently being used in the greenhouses in the Mediterranean and certainly in Spain, Greece, Italy. We are also working with Fiat, and it's going on the Fiat car for some energy generation at present. But it needs a few more years to get its stability correct.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Terence, and thank you, Ravi. Related question from Ajanta Jayatunga, Ravi. I believe Germany has solar power in over 50% of their homes. Can that not be emulated in UK as well as Sri Lanka?
Very good point, and I think that's absolutely spot on. Germany can actually go to 100% renewable if it wants to. So basically, after Fukushima, the German government, which had needed support from the Green parties to manage during Merkel's time, basically declared, I think in 2018, that they were going to go nuclear free. So they basically were going to remove all nuclear power stations by 2022. And after that, it would only be green technologies. Now, as a result of it, that has spurred on many of the German householders and others to move into solar and wind. As a country, they're able to do that because if for some reason the sun doesn't shine for a month and there is very little wind, they just tap on their neighbor, France, and France has the strongest nuclear energy source available. So Germany can afford to do that at present simply because there is a backup always next door with a provision that allows them to get energy if they want. That's why it's so important to have an energy mix. Germany doesn't have the hydro that we in Sri Lanka would have, because our backup power that always gives our base load will be our hydro. And then whatever else we put in will be on top of the hydro. So as a result, I think we are in a far better place in Sri Lanka to use solar and wind than most other countries. Already the hydro is giving most of the energies to Norway and Denmark and those countries that do have a lot of hydroelectricity.
And talking about energy mix, again, a question from Achanta Jatunga, is there a role for hydrogen and fusion energy in the renewable energy mix? I know it definitely in the UK, yes, but I guess it's more complex in Sri Lanka.
Yes, it is, but I think again, from the US point of view also, after the hiatus of the Trump age, once more under Biden, there's going to be a change coming through. And they once more started doing many more projects associated with solar and going forward. I think there's also this comment in chat that has come through, Ajit, with regard to US investors who come to the Sri Lanka. Yeah, that is absolutely correct. And that is basically why I believe that there has to be a fully transparent window in which Sri Lanka operates. And this transparency has to be spot on, where if there are investors who come in, they can come in, look at the situation, look at the land that they are going to get. At present, even with Punarin and Monaragala, the problem is that the government has given you the land block, they've given you the connection, but they've also said that you have to connect up to the local network, at which point you can feed the energy through. So it's done 70% of what's needed to get investors in, but that last 30% is still missing. And I think this is one of the problems that we have, and we really need to try and find ways in which it becomes a more investor-friendly nation for renewable energy technologies.
Sure. I think, we've had a really strong question and answer session, a wonderful talk earlier, Ravi, and I'd like to sort of end the session soon. I do have this other main sort of question, because we've talked about the energy mix, but I remember earlier on in the presentation, you talked about the balance, the issue being that the amount of anthropogenic emissions increasing. That's one issue, and that's because of the fossil fuel use. But the other part of that is taking away taking away of the emissions from or the carbon impact from the world. Now, for most of history, I guess the Earth had a natural capacity to take away the impact of heating or the carbon emission. But increasingly, I think human activity has also retarded that ability for those emissions to be neutralized or taken away. So what are your thoughts about natural solutions, the environment, forests, because that is another aspect, I think, which is critical for the sustainable development of Sri Lanka, because there's a natural way to also reverse climate change.
I absolutely agree, Gehatha. And again, I do work with some researchers in Brazil. So 2 years ago, I was in the Amazon with a colleague of mine, and we were doing a solar energy course in the Amazon within the rainforest there, which was just incredible. Forests are basically the lungs of the earth, and they clean up all of the CO2. And without that, the earth would not survive. I think I've read somewhere that all of the emissions of the US is cleaned up by the rest of the world's forests. So this is the amount of capacity that goes into half a gigaton or more in terms of cleaning power associated with the forest. So we have to preserve that. And I think with Sinharaj and some of the most beautiful forests with the huge biodiversity that we have, we really must protect that. So with that, we need to carry on and make sure everything that we do is done in a sustainable manner. And the sustainability has to extend to the ecosystem and everything else that is around.
Thank you. I think we will close with a fight. Oh, yes, Dharmed, go ahead.
Could I just make one comment on Dr. Jatunga's question? Today, the whole world is running with carbon economy. We have carbon economy today. The whole world is moving towards carbon neutral economy. It will take some time. When it happens, we don't stop there. We go towards hydrogen economy. The future of this world is to use solar energy and wind energy to break freely available water. We can have hydrogen and oxygen. We can have fuel cells to run vehicles. And whenever you want, burn hydrogen to produce energy. So that is hydrogen economy. So that is where we are. In fact, I was involved in initiating hydrogen institutes in 2 countries, one in Germany, one in Chile, because everybody around the globe, people are trying to make hydrogen institutes to produce hydrogen, and we don't stop there at carbon neutral economy. From their own words, we go towards hydrogen economy. So that is the whole world is moving. Then we will have a very carbon-free hydrogen economy, a clean atmosphere. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, Dharmed.
The researchers never stop. Research continues to do that. In fact, at this moment, I'm assessing 2 proposals for 2 countries to initiate hydrogen institutes. I personally went to Germany to start one. So every country is starting hydrogen institutes. Ravi, it's a good idea for us as well. I think in UK we have one. So in Sri Lanka, I know only one professor in Kuliapitiya working on hydrogen, but in Sri Lanka, we need to start that as well. That is the future. We have to go from carbon economy to hydrogen economy. That is Dr. Jatunga's question.
Thank you, Dharmed. Last question before we finish. I think, Ravi, you may have touched on this, but since the hill country is in the wetter part of Sri Lanka, would it be ideal to have solar farms in the hills to supply excess energy to hydro plants rather than have the solar plants in the drier parts of Sri Lanka? Interesting question. What are your thoughts, Ravi, on that?
It's a good question. I think if you can put solar plants in the hill country, that would be good. But I think you need flat terrain to run solar farms efficiently and cheaply. The whole idea here is to have, if possible, robotic systems that are very simple to operate and maintain. And typically, if you have some moving parts associated with it. So yes, if it can be put in the hill country in flat areas, yes, but otherwise it's more likely to be on large flat areas.
Thank you, Ravi. So with that, I think we will close the question and answer session. We've gone well over time, but that is testimony to how interesting this talk has been and how very interested the audience has been to raise questions. We've clearly been given some really good, clear answers. Thank you, Ravi, for talking about the climate crisis we are in, the causes of that, the link to fossil fuels, the way out of that through renewable energy, and practically what is it that we can do in Sri Lanka, with the maps that you shared, and giving us confidence that, particularly that combination of hydro and solar can be the answer to our energy requirements, and that it is possible. And then, of course, the encouragement you have shared to say, as professionals, we need to do more to engage with the authorities to make the case for renewable energy. So thanks again for making the time. I really appreciate that. And now I would like to call upon our Madam General Secretary, Gaini Senaratne, to give the vote of thanks and conclude this very interesting webinar and the 17th AGM proceedings of the Association of Professional Sri Lankans in the UK. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kehanta. Thank you, everyone. On behalf of APSL, I would like to thank Professor Ravi Silva for taking time out from your busy schedule to deliver the keynote address and educating all of us with a very valuable and timely presentation and a very informative discussion. I think all of you will agree with me, we all enjoyed the session. I would also like to thank Deputy High Commissioner, Mr. Samantha Pathirana, for taking time out from your busy schedule to join the AGM and webinar today. I would also like to thank our patron High Excellency, the High Commissioner, Mrs. Saroja Sirisena, and the staff at the Sri Lankan High Commission in London for their continued support. Our thanks also goes to our special guests joining in today, representing Hela Sarana, Mr. Jayantha Silva and Mr. Jayantha Pereira, and other members, and members representing Cosmos, and Mr. Ajanta Premaratna from Professional Association of UAE, and also Mr. Chintaka Gunatilaka from Sri Lankan Association of Japan. I would also like to extend many thanks to SESA, the media outlet, for providing continuing publicity for our activities. Special thanks to all of our family members for providing continued support throughout, and I hope they will continue to do so. Finally, I would like to thank the Executive Committee, the members of the APSL, and all of you who joined with us today to make this event a great success. Let's hope that we can plan our future events soon and see each other in person. Stay safe and well. Thank you very much and have a very good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks. Okay. See you then.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.